role was to help design and implement the error and event reporting system that was intended to enhance the standard Unix logging system. This was a small contribution, but there were other important innovations that we did at Sequent for Dynix PTX. One of these was called read, copy, update. This was a synchronization mechanism that enables very fast, very efficient reads by avoiding the use of locks and critical code paths. Read, copy, update was developed by Paul McKinney, who was an engineer at Sequent and now at IBM, and has since been incorporated into the Linux kernel. In September of 1999, IBM purchased Sequent, and like the former Sequent engineers, like me, were integrated into the IBM Linux Technology Center. Many of the LTC engineers began cultivating and developing strong leadership positions in the Linux community. I've already mentioned Paul McKinney and the work that he did on synchronization in the Linux kernel. Stephen Heminger, who now works for Vayada, was a networking engineer and remains today active as a key Linux networking contributor. Martin Bly, who later left IBM for Google, started the Autotest group for automating the nightly builds and testing of the Linux kernel. And Greg Crow-Hartman, who now works for Novell, is the maintainer of the USB subsystem, the Linux staging tree, and now runs the Linux driver project, also worked for the Linux Technology Center at IBM. Like many of these members of LTC, I too eventually left IBM, and I took the position of engineering director at the Open Source Development Lab. At OSDL, I worked with other Linux developers like Chris Wright, who now works for Red Hat, and was my first contact with the virtualization developers in Linux, and also with Randy Dunlap, who today works for Oracle, and among other things is a maintainer of the Linux documentation project. One other person was employed by OSDL at this time, and of course that was Linus Torvalds, who now works for the Linux Foundation and lives in Oregon, where a lot of this work that's being done on the Linux kernel is being undertaken. What I hope you gain from this description of my personal history are not the particular details about me, but rather an understanding that open source development communities operate on individual relationships, not corporate relationships. Corporate sponsorship of individuals is important. Employing open source developers to work on projects that are interesting and beneficial to a company is a contributing factor to the success of open source, but you should never lose sight of the fact that individual contributions are what drive the engine of open source. What's so exciting to me now is that Microsoft engineers are finding opportunities to join open source communities and to develop personal relationships with those communities. And it's my pleasure to be able to tell you a little bit about some of the projects that we're working on currently. Soon after I came to Microsoft, I began working with Sam Ramsey and other engineers in his department to form a unit that we named the Open Source Technology Center. And our purpose was to identify a few key open source projects that Microsoft could join and to make contributions to in order to demonstrate several shifts in Microsoft's thinking. First, we wanted to signal that Microsoft was becoming more pragmatic about the benefits associated with open source software and was supportive of open source software and open source development methodologies. Second, we wanted to demonstrate to customers that it's okay to run open source with Microsoft products. In fact, if you do, you can have a great experience on the Windows platform. Third, we wanted to show vendors that we recognize their desire to use mixed open source and closed source development methodologies to solve their technology needs, and that we support them in that effort. And finally, we wanted to demonstrate to open source developers that there are benefits to them making Windows one of the build targets for their products, and that they have Microsoft support in doing so. One of the first projects we selected as a good candidate for our participation was PHP. PHP applications are clearly popular among web developers, but the PHP community had lost the ability to build the full product on Microsoft technology. I mean literally lost the ability, because we had lost some key libraries and had not been able to compile that technology using the latest Microsoft C compiler. Our first step was to reach out to Pierre Joy, who is the leading contributor to PHP and Windows. And we simply asked him, is there something that we can do to help you? And his response was, well, I could use a couple of servers. So we sent him a couple of servers to do his work. We asked him again what we could do to help, and he said he could use some funding. And so we provided this funding. And finally, he said he could use some technical support from Microsoft in the form of test engineers and build experts with whom he could work, and so we provided these as well. Our next order of business was to re-implement those lost libraries and to rewrite the build scripts to take advantage of our current technology. We followed this work by testing the release thoroughly, squeezing out bugs that had accumulated over time due to a lack of robust use. And finally, we started running performance tests to look for bottlenecks. The culmination of this work was the release of PHP 5.3 at the end of June last year. Since then, Pierre has led the development of 2 stability releases for PHP on Windows, 5.3.1 and 5.3.2. And he's worked on the first release of APC, the alternative PHP caching mechanism for Windows, to further improve performance on our platform. So what's the real impact of this work? Well, from a developer's point of view, this is best summarized by a recent tweet from Rasmus Lerdorf, the creator of PHP. His comment was, as of PHP 5.3, PHP in Windows is back to being a first-class citizen. From a customer's